Very welcome here to spend this time with us today. I'm Carolyn Soares from the Corra Foundation. It's an absolute pleasure to be guiding you through this information session on the Promise Partnership this afternoon. I think we're all coming here together today because I believe we've got a shared commitment really to ensure that children in Scotland grow up loved, safe, respected and really able to realise their full potential. We've got some amazing organisations in the virtual room today who are just living that commitment day in and day out. It's an absolute pleasure to spend an hour or so with you today. So I hope you see that there's a very clear line from the First Minister's commitment to a written branch review of care in Scotland through the publication of that review just almost a year ago now, and the promise that was made that day to us meeting here today to help take some practical steps forward to keep that promise. And keeping that promise really means that children get to stay with their families where it's safe for them to do so, that families would be actively supported for this to happen, and that wider structural inequalities in systems would be tackled, and no family would be left behind. So all of that really means change in the systems around families, led by the trusted and respected voices of children, young people and the families themselves, and that people around children, young people and their families need to be supported too. And we're absolutely delighted that you're joining us today to find out more how the Promise Partnership can enable and support you to keep that promise. So in a minute, my colleague Kelly is going to take you through the detail of that. But first, just a couple of wee housekeeping notes that I'll just reflect on just quickly. They're up there on the screen for you. As I say, we're all really committed, we're really experienced on Zoom now, maybe a bit more experienced than we ever hoped we would be, but it's really helpful if you're able to keep your mic muted unless you're asked to speak. It does help so much with the sound quality for everyone. And you might want to turn your camera off, at least during the presentation. That would ensure that everyone can see and hear Kelly really well as she's making her presentation. I want to just draw your attention to the fact the session's been recorded and that's been started now, and that will allow anyone who's not able to make it today to view it or for you to review it again. A few of you have done this already, but it'd be so helpful if you could add your organisation name to your screen. And you can do that just by going up on your little square to the three dots at the right hand side, click on that and bring up the option rename. I know everyone's familiar with the Zoom chat function now. In fact, I hope you're all busy saying hello to your friends and colleagues that you haven't seen for a while I'm doing this boring bit, but please stay on the chat throughout the session, because that's the place to add your questions, which we're going to pick up on and come back and answer in the Q&A session that's coming up. Lastly, if you do have any technical problems, any difficulties, my wonderful colleague Maren Thompson is here to support us all, so please message her direct on the chat function if you have any problems. So just to run you through the agenda then, clicking on to slide 3 in our deck. My kind colleague, thank you Kelly. Just to run you through that agenda, welcome and introductions, just about complete. I'm checking my notes now to make sure I've covered everything I'm supposed to, and in a moment Kelly's going to share with you where the Promise Partnership has come from, what it offers and what it aims to achieve. And she'll also then take you step by step through the process, the application questions and the reflective developmental process that's been adopted. And then Kelly will be joined by Elaine Wilson to answer your questions from the chats that you'll be putting into the chat from the Q&A session. So it's our intention to run for about an hour on that agenda, and we'll certainly finish at 1:30. So final encouragement from me to use the chat function for your questions, and I'll hand over now to Kelly.
Help if I take myself off mute. Thank you, Carolyn. So Carolyn's already kind of touched on how we got here, but just to recap, so the Independent Care Review published its findings in February 2020, and since then the Scottish Government has announced £4 million investment in July 2020 to support families and keep the promise. Now, the Corra team has been working closely with the Promise team since the summer to hear directly from their consultations and get a better understanding of what is needed in the sector. Now, so what is the Promise Partnership? So the Promise Partnership is a fund administered by Corra on behalf of the Scottish Government. Now, this fund is really about creating capacity across the sector, and it's looking to shift culture and improve collaborative approaches with a focus on service redesign and system change. Now, we're really looking for organisations who know what needs to change, but need additional resource to make that change happen. Now, the open call process went live on the 1st of February. And the first stage of this open call process is the Are You Ready checklist, which can be found on Corra's website. Now, this checklist really is just to gauge whether your proposition and your organisation is a good fit for the fund. So once you've completed the checklist, if your proposition is a good fit, you will receive a link to the online application form, which also includes the self-assessment form. Now, the closing date for the application form is noon on the 1st of March. And once we've received all of the applications, these will be reviewed by the decision makers panel. Now, the decision makers panel is made up entirely of care experience people and family members, and they will have their decisions and people will be notified of the outcome the week commencing the 29th of March. So who can apply? Well, we recognise the importance of a whole system approach, and that's why any public, private or third sector organisation working in the care system across Scotland can apply to this fund. Now, we can only accept one application per organisation, and we really want those organisations to have already made a public commitment to keeping the promise. We also want organisations to be able to show us how they've embedded the promise since February 2020. So what will you get? Well, you can apply for up to £50,000 over 1 year to help implement your plans. But this is more than just financial investment. You'll have the opportunity to link in with the Promise team. And with that, you'll be working alongside peer networks. You'll have access to training programs and also the opportunity to engage with Promise Design School champions. Now, this fund isn't for organisations who are unable to show us their commitment to keeping the promise. It's also not for any ongoing delivery of services or any new delivery of services, because this organisation is really about providing an opportunity for organisations to look at what needs to change within their organisation to be better aligned to the promise. So I touched on this earlier, but the open call Are You Ready checklist is really to help determine if your organisation is ready. It's going to help us get a sense of your values and your commitment to change. So we're looking at, have you already made steps to keeping the promise? And is it clear that you're willing to work collaboratively? We're also looking for services to show that they recognise what needs to change within their service to better meet the needs of children, young people and their families. So onto the application form. So here we're looking for you to show us how and why this investment is needed. It's really an opportunity for you to show your journey so far, what you want to change, and also what you've changed already. Now, when we talk about changes implemented already, this could be things like new policies or procedures that your organisation has put in place, or it could even be things like changes to the language that you use. We would ask for applications to be kept simple and keep it clear and make it easy for us to understand. And so finally, we have the self-assessment, which is included in the application form. So this is an evaluation tool which will be used throughout the 12-month funding period. And it includes sections on participation and involvement. It looks at the family support principles and also children's rights. Now, we're asking organisations to score themselves from 1 to 10, 10 being great, all singing, all dancing. But what we don't expect or want is for organisations to be scoring 10. You know, we want people to be honest, we want people to be critical, and we want people to reflect really on what needs to change within their organisation to improve services for children, young people and families. So that was just a very brief overview on the criteria and the application process. And now I will hand over to Carolyn, who's going to take some questions.
Thanks, Kelly, and getting across there. I hope to everyone the huge aspirations that the Promise that are behind the Promise partnership, and the kind of real wraparound support that's available both at this point where you're considering putting your plans forward, and also as we go together ahead across the next kind of year or so with this programme. Kelly said I'm going to answer some questions, but actually what I'm going to do is invite Kelly and Elaine to form our virtual panel here, and in fact it will be them who are answering your questions. So we encouragement again that the easiest way to for us to pick up your questions is for you to pop them in the chat function there. We're really very keen to make sure that you have time and space to ask whatever questions are occurring to you, whether they're about the process, that Kelly's particularly kind of outlined there, what are these next steps, whether it's the timelines or indeed the detail of the form and the questions. We're absolutely here to answer those questions and to provide a bit more advice, a bit more background as to why the Promise Partnership has been structured in this way. So the easiest way is just to type those out. We're here to pick up, and we've set aside plenty of time for us to be considering those questions and discussing them with you. Maybe just say again, we touched there on the advisory group and the decision makers. And this is great. Actually, I get to pick on people and pull them up. And Elaine Wilson, I'm just going to warn you now that your name's about to be called here. I wondered if Elaine, if you would just perhaps share a wee bit more with people who are on the call around the decision makers, the decision making panel, and the advisory group that's also there to support the Promise Partnership. I think it'd be interesting just to share a wee bit more about how those people came forward and what kind of skills and experience are reflected on those two groups.
Thanks, Carolyn. That's really happy to answer. I've put my headphones on so everybody can hear, because my boiler in the background has started to make rattling noises, as we all expect now on Zoom. So we were delighted when we to be working with the advisory group and decision makers panel. We are really committed to the fundamental principles of the Promise when we were shaping the Promise Partnership, and ensuring children, young people and family members' voices were at the heart of it, and also building on what had been delivered by the care review, and the fact that those voices of children, young people, family members and also professionals were in the mix in terms of thinking about what happens next and how we shift and make changes. So what the group is made up of representatives from, they're both care experienced individuals and also people that work with young people and family members. That advisory group was an open call to people, so we advertised for people and people came forward. We also approached a few people who had indicated an interest in the work of the Promise. They had to provide us with a short bit of information to help us think about what to be involved. That advisory group is there to help us shape the criteria. So they've been consulted on the criteria for the Promise Partnership, and also the parameters for the Promise Partnership. So what's in the key critical questions that we need to think about. So that's the purpose of the advisory group. The decision makers panel are the people that will make all the final funding decisions on the Promise Partnership. Again, that was an open call for people to come forward who had an interest in the Promise Partnership. The decision makers panel are made up purely of care experienced people, individuals and family members. There's 10 people on that group. They're all currently at the moment working through how they take the questions from the form and turn it into an assessment template, where they will review each application against those questions. So how well does it fit, and make those final decisions, which, as you know from the information on our website, the announcements won't be made at the end of March. We will be putting up on our website, if it isn't there yet, but this week, information on the advisory group and a bit more of those processes. I should also reiterate that the Promise team are not involved in any of the decisions or the governance structure for the Promise Partnership. All kind of insights they've received through the consultation period of the Promise, and particularly as it leads up to them launching the operational change plan. But they're not involved in the advisory group, and they're also not involved in any funding decisions. So there's a clear level of accountability and sort of clear governance structure in place to support decision making.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Elaine. I lost you a little bit there, but I'm hoping everyone picked up on the points you're making. I think the old broadband looped back in absolutely perfectly. We're all trying to sit as close to our routers as we can today, keep our broadband going, and that's just given your input there has just sparked a whole range of questions. Thank you everyone who's been adding them to the chat. So I'm just going to let Kelly and Elaine know that I've got a whole set of questions here that I'm now just going to manage and fire at you in that sense. So so let's get going and make sure that we try and pick up as many of these as we possibly can. So and so lots of fantastic questions. Thanks folks, just very clear questions, very hopefully very clear answers that we can give you to kind of much of this. So we'll just pick up on them as in the order as they're coming in there. So the first is around, it's a very interesting question actually. Of course, we've talked already about the way the Promise Partnership provides support to build capacity within your organisation to take forward plans to respond to the promise and the commitments you've made. So the question here that's come through the chat, is there a requirement for to provide a sustainability plan for that work? So, you know, do folk putting themselves forward need to be able to show that there'll be continuation of the work after this initial tranche of funding from the Promise Partnership ends? So we didn't discuss a mechanism, Kelly, Elaine, of who would pick up those questions and how you would let me know. So I'm going to fling it over to both of you, and whichever takes off your mute function first gets to go.
I'll go first, seeing as Kelly's got a name. Kelly, you can add everything that I've missed from the conversation. So I think the way that the open call has been designed at the moment, we're really looking for people to think about funding that will enable them to make changes. So rather than think, how do I continue the work? What are the kind of activities or things that I need to implement now that will make me able to sustain shifts or practices? So while there isn't a specific question about sustainability or making things happen, it's about what can I do now that will make the change progress and move forward. So as Kelly alluded to in her presentation, they could be things like you maybe already developed a set of policies. So some of your work might be about, well, how do I now go about making those policies more implementationable? So how do we put them into practice and make them work for our staff and the people that come through our door? Or you could be at that beginning of that journey, you are thinking about how do I maybe get someone in and help us think about policies that are more aligned to the promise and things like that. So I think it's not so much about how we sustain what we're going to do, but how this is really about thinking about what do I need to do that will last in the long term through this fund. I hope that makes that.
Yeah, I agree, Elaine. I think, you know, in terms of the sustainability, depending on what it is we're talking about, it is really about kind of embedding those changes within your organisation. So I suppose if we are talking about changing your approach or introducing policies, I suppose, you know, the hope would be that these would be embedded and would continue throughout the life of the organisation, if you like.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to keep firing questions towards you, and please just keep adding them to the chat, folks, as well. And at the end we will come back and let you know how you just make sure you can be in contact with us direct if there's anything further you want to chat about or query with us. So a couple of questions I'm going to just pull together here because they seem connected, and the question really to ask for a bit more information about I suppose what can be funded. So we've talked quite a bit about the resource coming into an organisation staff post, it could build capacity. And similarly, you know, does that have to be a member of staff who's a specific implementation manager for the Promise Partnership, or could it be within an existing staff member's remit? So tell us a wee bit more, Kelly or Elaine, about some of those kind of questions about who could this, what capacity could this create within organisations, and how could that be organised?
Sorry, Carolyn, I don't know if that was my internet or yours, but I kind of lost you for a wee bit there. But I suppose, yeah, in terms of the capacity, what we'll be looking at.
Actually, I lost a little bit there as well.
Oh, did you? Would you be able to just recap the question, Carolyn? Sorry.
No problem at all. I'd run that by her. You're going to see me at some point run towards my broadband router then if it's me. So the question's really about, so we've talked about building capacity in organisations through, for example, funding a staff member post? Does it have to be an existing, like a core staff member? It could be a consultant who's brought in. And then connected to that, a similar question, does it have to be a specific implementation manager for the Promise Partnership? Or could that be within an existing staff member's remit? So I think the questions there are, does it have to be our staff member, or could we use the funds for a consultant? And does it have to be a specific person, or could this be within the remit of someone who's already working in the organisation?
Yeah, I think, as far as I'm concerned, it could be an existing staff member or it could be a consultant. I suppose what we're looking for is for organisations to really think about what it is they need to kind of look and implement these training, these needs within their organisation. So if it is an existing staff member, then I suppose we'd be looking at how their role is going to change and how it's focused on taking forward some of these changes. But yeah, I think it can be existing or a new staff member, depending on what organisations feel like they need to take forward these changes. I don't know whether you've got anything to add, Elaine.
I would just highlight that, I think that's completely right, Kelly, just highlight that in the form people will see that we've got with it the commitment from senior officer and then the implementation lead and what they'll have permissions to do. And what we're really looking is for that implementation person to be the kind of key person that will connect with the Promise Partnership, the Promise team and their organisation. So they'll be the kind of main route for us to have ongoing conversations with. We wouldn't expect them to be doing all the shifts and changes, but they would be kind of having a kind of primary role in making the connections and making shifts and changes happen. So just being clear in that in the application form as well for people.
Thanks, folks. And great question here that's come through, which is really about the stage of this sort of change journey that organisations you'd expect organisations to be on. So question is, will you've had to have already made changes, such as changing policies, or can you be about to starting to implement those changes? So like at what point in the change journey does a successful organisation in this process have to be at?
I think you can be at any stage of the journey. I think what you have to be, as Kelly alluded to in the slides, is you have to be really honest with yourself where you are in that journey, particularly in the self-reflection. So I think what we're really looking for in the fund is for people that have got the commitment and the willingness to make the shifts necessary, so that you have got that from your senior management right through to staff, that people are thinking about this, they're thinking about what opportunities exist within their organisation, what they need to do. So if you're maybe just the start where you're going, look, we've kind of mapped out an outline of where we want to go, but we've got loads of stuff to do, like we've got to start implement policies, or we need to think more about how we fully involve children, young people and family members in some of our processes, but we're not quite sure how to start that. Be honest and say that's where you are, and then highlight how that money was. Similarly, if you're much further along and you've progressed a lot of the ideas from, or the actions from the Promise, and you're now at a stage where, well, actually we could really take a big drive and leap forward if we were just to do this big piece of work, or if we were to bring in a consultant to help us make over this, then again, be honest with that. I think that's what we're looking for people to really take a wee bit of time to self-reflect and think about, right, this will enable us to make the next steps necessary in our journey. Because that's what we're looking for, everybody to be on this journey together, recognising that everybody will be at different paces.
Fantastic, thanks, Elaine. I'm going to give you two rapid fire questions together here. Very clear questions again. Thank you, everyone. So a question here about, can a proposal be from a partnership rather than a single organisation? And then a second one to pick up, is there a time limit to spend the funds? So I think what's behind that question, if I'm reading it correctly, is does the work have to start this year? Could the funds be held and the work started later? So two kind of quite clear, rapid questions. Could it be a proposal from a partnership rather than a single organisation? And is there a time limit to spend the funds? Could the work start later?
Yeah, so we are looking for the work to start this year and to be carried out within the next 12 months. In terms of the partnership, I suppose recognising that £50,000 is not a massive investment, and really what this open call route is for organisations to really be looking internally at the changes that they need to make, as opposed to those kind of external partnerships. Now, it might be that people are having conversations with other stakeholders in their area, and it might be an idea that they all put in an application form to do their own bit of this work that kind of will be tied together. But I think, yeah, this fund is really about looking internally and making those changes within their organisation, if that makes sense. Do you want to add anything, Elaine, to that?
Sorry, just taking myself on mute. I just noticed a comment in the chat about the financial year. So what we're looking for is that people are start the work within when the grant offer is made, so within that year. So if you get your grant offer and the grant starts from April, we'd be looking at to cover the next 12-month period. So we'd be looking at your kind of journey over a 12-month period, rather than it being fully committed by the 31st of March next year. So it's a 12-month time we're talking about there. But we would be having regular conversations with people if they're successful to map where their progress is and discuss anything that might have shifted during that period as well.
Thanks both. I'm going to tee up now for a question that was perhaps anticipated in Kelly's input there. We've talked a lot about capacity and the way that the Promise Partnership can help support this big change and shift that needs to happen across many different organisations that form what the care review talked about as kind of the system, not always a kind of well pulled together system. But the question that's come up in a few comments in the chat really is about services. So let's hear a wee bit from Kelly and Elaine then about why is the focus of this funding about building capacity, staff resource and other capacity within organisations rather than funding new services. So the kinds of comments that are there are comments like, we've spotted a gap in our local area for a service. Could this support that service? We really need funding for new services. You know, we're seeing needs. So could you talk through a wee bit, guys, about the focus that's here that is therefore focusing not on funding services but on the capacity within organisations to plan for, prepare and undertake a wider change?
Yeah, I think what the things that the care review threw up is actually that, you know, there needs to be changes to the system, and there's lots of elements of the system that's not working. And so rather than have a fund that is continuing to fund services that we've been delivering, this is about, I suppose, organisations being able to take stock and look at their internal practices and look at what they need to do prior to kind of that service, developing that service delivery. So it's really about a shift in their organisations. Yeah, I don't know if I'm very clear on that, but it's about organisations looking internally and looking how they do things. So it's like the step before service delivery, I would say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would kind of echo this. When we were developing this fund, and obviously we'd reviewed all the stuff that had come out, the actions from the Promise, and thinking about it, the system doesn't always feel joined up or connected, or there's lots of bits to the system. And we also took reflections from the consultations that the Promise have been happening, as well as the feedback from the advisory group. And what we're really trying to get to is a place where we almost take, this fund is taking that breath and step back to think about, right, so if we were to redesign services or think about what's really needed, what is the infrastructure we need in place to enable that to happen, reflecting on the actions and the insights from the Promise work, and also #Keep the Promise, the work that's ongoing. So we're thinking about, if you are thinking about new services or recognising gaps, it's maybe about, right, so in our organisation, are we at the right stage to really be prepared to work alongside care experienced young people and their family members to understand what a service looks like and needs for them? Are we collaborating well to think about that? Do we have all those kind of bits in place to help us look and scope and figure all that out so the service meets continual needs? And so this fund was really designed to reflect all those those reflections and feedback that have been received over the last couple of years, to think about, in an organisation, how do you support those kind of elements to enable things to shift and change? So we think by doing that, that will then enable us to all be in a better position to think about what are the services that are needed going forward and things like that. And we're not saying that obviously there's gaps in service provision and support just now, and there's
Now, folks, I'm going to check if that was just me or if Elaine went slightly kind of 1980s synth pop on everyone there.
I think it was Elaine.
It was such a serious point as well, but yeah, I had that synth pop thing in my head. I couldn't help but say it. Elaine, if your internet's still on there, would you mind just making that last point again, just as you were finishing off there?
About that, everybody, the fact that it's not that we don't recognise that there will be gaps in services and services are needed, but it's just this fund is really about us all in a better position so that we can redesign services that are reflective of the needs and everything that came out of the promise partnership, the promise. And if you are looking for funding and support for delivery of services, then there's other funding opportunities available for family support work. Fantastic.
So a link there. Hopefully everyone a clear explanation, but also a link there to linking you up with other resources, and obviously we hold a good bit of that information and able to have a conversation about that. Picking up the questions, I'm scrolling through here. If you see my eyes going up and down, I'm making sure I'm picking up all the questions here. So kind of again, another right on the point question here around geography. So tell us a little bit, Kelly, Elaine, about how geography will be taken into account in looking at the Promise Partnership and the award of funds. So I think what's underneath that, is a kind of awareness about kind of big urban areas, number of organisations working in those big urban areas, but to what extent will we be able to think Scotland-wide and be able to think about the challenges for remote, rural and kind of island localities as well as we kind of look at the proposals coming in?
I suppose for me, we need to recognise there will be some Scotland-wide organisations that apply to this fund. So they need to think about how would they be adapting their organisational infrastructure to think about the needs in a rural locality as opposed to an urban locality. We're obviously keen to encourage a wide spread of geography. And I think while we're not going to proportion money up per local authority or anything like that, we'll look at applications on their individual merits and basis. We will have in the back of our mind about a good coverage of Scotland, and that for applicants to recognise the different challenges they may be presented with if they are working in an area that's predominantly rural or an island, and the different measures they have to put in place to make their infrastructure work for the needs of children, young people and families, as opposed to if you're in an organisation within a city.
Thanks, Elaine. And I notice Kath, our colleague, is on the call here as well. So incredibly helpful. And Kath is working to support the decision-making panel. So really helpful for Kath to be hearing these kinds of questions. And we'll obviously look to support the decision makers with what will be, kind of complex and challenging consideration that they'll be making as they review the proposals. Picking up a comment here from Nikki, which a kind of reflection that perhaps in our language, the way we've talked about it, saying that the funding of the Promise Partnership feels orientated towards family support and work with care leavers, and making a strong point here, Nikki, about there's work with young people who need strengthen other relationships to thrive in their life. So give us a take on that, Kelly or Elaine. That's certainly a point that's within the promise and within the kind of conclusions of the independent care review. It's not entirely orientated towards family support, but we have talked about family support quite a bit, I suppose, today. What's behind that?
Yeah, I think we spoke about family support and the intensive family support principles are really kind of important in terms of the decision makers panel assessing these applications. I suppose in terms of it being focused on young people and families, it is focused on young people and families, and it's also focused on children, young people and families who have experienced care, and those who are also on the edges of care. But I think throughout the application process, we will be taking into account the family support principles and looking that applications are kind of meeting those principles. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does, and the beauty of the chat is, if there's something else that sparks off that, folks, please add that into the bottom of the chat. And my apologies, Anne had already added something around the geographic point, which does build on the conversation we were just having a wee minute ago. So I'm just going to look back to that kind of point about geography. And interesting point from Anne about the possibility, and what she said is a related question, how would you address the possibility of competing bids from one local authority area? I'll ask Kelly and Elaine to come in a minute, but I suppose from my own point of view, I just want to get across that the aim of the Promise Partnership is to create a connected and collaborative cohort of funded and supported people within all kinds of organisations across local authorities and elsewhere who are working together to make the changes that are needed in this kind of wider system. So sorry, I'm jumping in and trying to answer the question before Kelly and Elaine get in there. But Elaine, you've come off mute, so give me your take on that one.
I would just really echo what you've said there, Carolyn. I think what we're trying to do here, and it really reflects, I think, what the Promise is trying to do, but a lot of other conversations that are going on about wider system change thinking, about how rather than be competitive with each other, how we collaborate more, recognising that by building the infrastructure within individual organisations, it might help us think about how we work more in partnership with others in our local authority, to recognise that by doing that we can offer the best services and support for children, young people and families, so that their needs are at the centre of everything. So we're trying to think about how we can best support the internal infrastructure rather than it being a competitive nature, that we can kind of build on that sense of, you could have 2 or 3 organisations working together across the local authority and come to this fund for some support, by recognising that's really just about each building their own skills and capacities to work better within that geographical area.
Excuse my pause there, folks. I'm reading detailed points and questions and trying to make sure that I'm picking them all up and making sure that I'm fielding them properly to Kelly and Elaine. One from earlier in the chat, which is a good question for all grant makers to answer, which is about federated charities. So just to throw that one over to you. So it might be people on the call who are working for federated charities, a number of different branches or local organisations. So how will we look at those federated charities? Could each branch apply? Could the central federated charity put forward a proposal for change? What are you looking for? What are you expecting?
There's nothing to stop federated charities from applying if they have their usual sort of their own board of trustees, their own set of audit accounts, charity number and things like that. I think the key thing for me is to really think about, if you're trying to shift things within an organisational or federational culture, how do you do that if there's 3 or 4 different, there could be 3 or 4 different things happening? So for me, it's more about how do you coordinate some of those responses? How do you think about joining things up? And so making those connections in that area. I'll stop just now, but I've just noticed Nikki's come back with a point about families. And can I just highlight as well, while we're really important about children, young people and families, I think when we're talking about the families as well, and the family principles, is about often children, young people themselves define their families. So, you know, we need to think about what the family needs the children and young people as well when we're talking about family practices. So that might not be, so going back to what was highlighted in the independent care review and the work there about thinking about that, family structure is slightly different than what we might perceive it to be, but we can make that clearer in some of the information on our website.
Thanks, Elaine, and it gives me another chance just to mention that if there's something particular that you want to raise with us that's particularly focused on your organisation and the work you're doing, or particular form or situation that you're in, then obviously we're sharing contact details, we're connecting with you here, we're keen to follow up with you if that would help you consider what your next steps are. So there will be a couple of things in the chat here where you might think actually we'll just want to have a quick follow-up conversation or email exchange about that. You're hugely welcome to do that, and that's exactly the reason for having this this kind of session, to give you the connections to be able to do that. There was one point from just earlier up in the chat I now kind of reviewing and just picked up on, is there a current cohort that I could join, was someone's question. I have to say you're here talking about the first potential cohort, so it's the first chance to really join the Promise partnership, and to be part of the emerging cohort that will start from this year. So so this is new, this is kind of brand new, and hopefully has a quite an important impact in terms of supporting a wider and longer term shift across a number of organisation sectors and a kind of wider system. Another reminder then that we're at 4:15, so that if there's final questions, this would be a good time to put them into the chat. If there's things others have said that you think we should go back to and talk a wee bit more about, then we're very, very happy to do that. If there are questions you think I haven't picked up on, either because I've missed it on the chat, which has been busy, or because we haven't picked up quite on the point that you were trying to get across, then please just draw my attention to that in the chat, and I'll do my very best. Just coming in then, so a few final questions, which I'll field now. So we haven't, someone saying we haven't publicly signed up to keep the promise. Can we still do it, and how can we do it, and what implication does that have in terms of coming into the Promise partnership?
So yeah, when we talk about a public commitment to the promise, there is obviously the Promise Pledge, which I do think you can sign up to, and I think if you look on the Promise team's website, there is an opportunity to do that. But when we talk about a public commitment to promise, we're not just referring to that. So it could be even, changes that you've made within your organisation, or it could be an acknowledgement on your website, or it could be supportive tweets of the promise. So anything really, it's not just the pledge in terms of when we talk about that, public commitment to the promise.
Thanks, Kelly. Hopefully that's clear. And again, if you feel that you want to kind of talk to us more about that, then you're kind of extremely welcome to do so. Question again, just picking up on this point around care experienced young people who may not be in contact with their family. So I want to just pick up again on that point. So the question here, we're working with care experienced students, many of them at the point where they don't have contact with family support. So is there something there that we're not picking up in terms of the kind of situation there? I'm not sure if there's one where we want to have a wee chat direct with you, or you tell me. I see Kelly reading. I can see she's.
Yes, sorry, I'm not very good at multitasking.
No, it's fine. I'm doing the same.
Yeah, we are talking about family support, but I think if organisations are working with care experienced people, young people, and they're not engaged with the families, that doesn't mean that organisation isn't a good fit for the fund. Again, I suppose it's thinking about what they are coming forward for. So if they are looking again at kind of their internal infrastructure and how that needs to change. But yes, family support is important. But if you're not working with families, and I suppose this goes back to Elaine's point earlier, the definition of a family is not necessarily what we're all kind of used to thinking. But yeah, I'm waffling a bit now, but no, I think if you are working with care experienced people and they're not working with, or you're not supporting their families, I think you would still be eligible for this fund, depending on what the proposition was.
Thanks, Kelly. And then just as we're still on that line about eligibility, just picking up, thank you, a question that I hadn't picked up from earlier, which was around a particular kind of organisation. So we've got someone from a legal firm who's on the call, legal firm working around trauma, and with solicitors who've got experience of kind of violence reduction and social work and so on. So a question there about could a firm like that be the kind of one that would be considering shifting their culture and focusing more on how they can best support care experienced families. What's your take on that?
On you go, Kelly.
Sorry, well, I mean, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but I think absolutely. I think if this organisation is working with care experience and they need additional resource to help them get better aligned to the promise, then I think absolutely they'd be able to apply, again, depending on the proposition. But I don't know whether you have any different thoughts, Elaine.
No, I agree. I think all organisations that are part of this system and how they can all change together to build an infrastructure that is much more supportive and based around the needs and working with children, young people and family members. So definitely apply, depending on their individual circumstances and the proposition. I think what we're mindful of is if people have kind of, not saying that we're all cash rich, particularly when we're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, but we will be looking at people who their resources and their current ability to meet these kind of commitments within their own resources. So I do think you need to think about, is this something that will enable us to move forward? We don't have current capacity or resources to do it, and this money will help us do that. That's one thing you have to think about. So that would be maybe a point for some of the private organisations, because obviously the promise is committed about money not making profit of children and young people, and the money is there to actually support an infrastructure change.
Thanks both. A very useful comment in the chat here, which I think aligns very strongly with the work that we're trying to do as we look forward ahead. Someone saying that they would be really keen to engage in work that's about the process and principles around thinking about design of services. So, I mean, that's just, that's music to our ears, I suppose, because I hope everyone on the call's picked up that actually kind of underpinning the Promise Partnership is a very strong commitment to a really, well-informed and fresh approach to the design of services, and the design of services that absolutely places centrally within that the voice of children, young people and their families, to ensure that we are designing services in Scotland that are well informed by their voices, that are kind of respectful and promoting their potential in life, and absolutely services that will bring about the best possible futures and outcomes for all involved. And anything else to say just about the kind of the links to service design of the Promise Partnership, and maybe particularly the Promise itself?
So we have been working really closely with the Scottish approach to service design. So Kat Macaulay, who's I think is the chief designer, or head of design is her title in the Scottish Government. So we have been working closely with Kat's team, and Kat's team are very much part of the Promise support package that's there. So any of the work that we're doing, and as Kelly highlighted earlier, any of the kind of support that will be tied into the Promise Partnership, there will be natural roots and that team and the insights and the knowledge that they bring, and how to help people think through some of these some of the practicalities around service redesign.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm just going to make a final call now. The pace of the questions in the chat feels like we're covering most that have been picked up, but just a final call now, as we've got kind of 5 minutes left, that if there's anything else, one or two that I want to pick up on now, but anything else that's occurred to you, either from our examples or answers to questions, or from anything else that anyone's raised in the chat. If there's anything you want to spark off from someone else's comment, then please do kind of let us know now. This is a good chance to get that discussion going, and a good chance for us to have this opportunity to speak with all of you kind of direct. Of course, there's, as I've said a couple of times, not the last time you're able to ask a question. I want to just kind of probably make a suggestion around federated charities, which we've picked up in the discussion, but I wonder from the chat whether we haven't quite kind of nailed that. I'm really happy to talk again, or Kelly, Elaine, please jump in. But also just want to make the offer actually maybe around Home Starts. Let's have, it might be best just to have a call and have a conversation about that. That direct again. We're very happy to do that. I'll pause here just in case either Kelly or Elaine wants to jump in if they've seen that in the chat.
I would agree, Carolyn. I think it'll be dependent on the individual needs of each sort of federated organisation and how they plan to approach the idea. So I think it's probably a separate conversation to understand more about specific needs that they're looking at.
Thanks, Elaine, and there Gillian's coming back saying that'd be helpful. So there's a date there for a call, and we'll confirm the kind of the details of how to do that just as we're finishing off. And my fantastic colleagues who are on the call, who are busy checking that we've gone through and we've picked up all the questions that we feel that we have. So again, just a very last chance. If there's any questions you feel you haven't had a chance to put forward at the last minute. And now someone's done that, and you see me pausing and reading. So let me just read this out and just share it with everyone. Not aligned to the promise, Social Security Scotland are keen to work and engage with organisations involved in the care experience sector to ensure benefit take up and maximisation. So thank you. That's Kenneth who's left his email address if anyone wants to kind of connect around that further. Thanks, Kenneth, for taking this chances at kind of a super group of kind of 70 or nearly 80 folk on that call. So hope if people are interested in that work and connecting with you, then they'll take you up on that, and you've very kindly left your address there. So that's fantastic, and I think that means that we probably will draw to a close now. So Kelly's got the very last slide up there again. So just closing off the session, just a sort of couple of comments. I suppose from me, I really hope we've met your aims in coming along to this session today. Like, our primary aim obviously was to make sure you're leaving this session with everything you need to know in very practical terms to take forward your organisation's engagement with the Promise Partnership. But we also wanted the chance for you to meet virtually at least the Corra team, who are all here to help and to ensure you know who to get in touch with if you want to have a further chat for further information. And I suppose finally we wanted to make sure we're providing a space today for people to come together and just share the momentum that's there to keep the promise. In Scotland, I mean, it builds from the commitment of the Scottish Government to make such a strong financial investment in the Promise Partnership. More than 100 organisations who've already made a public pledge to keep the promise. We've got independent funders who are tracking these developments closely and very keen to align their own support to this work. And obviously from children, young people and their families whose voices are absolutely central to this movement. So thank you so much for your time today. Please be in touch with us by email direct to promisepartnership@corra.scot for any further questions. And please look out for our continuing updates on the Promise Partnership on the Corra website and on our social media. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope everyone has a safe and good week ahead. Thanks so much.